Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a huge question, one that really sits at the crossroads of faith, history, and reason. It's foundational to Western civilization, really.
All right, let's just get right to it. The question that really kicks this whole thing off is, well, pretty blunt. Who did Mary cheat with? I mean, just phrasing it that way, it totally reframes the whole story in modern secular terms, right? It makes us look at it from a completely new angle.
So, to really get a handle on this, we've got to start by looking through one specific lens, the lens of faith. That means we have to go back to the original texts and understand the story on its own terms, exactly as it was told.
And if you look at it from that perspective, through the Christian Gospels, the answer to our blunt question is super simple. She didn't cheat, period. The idea here is the virgin birth, which is a core belief, right? It says the pregnancy wasn't, well, normal. It was a miraculous, divine event, a conception by the Holy Spirit.
And you know what's fascinating? The Bible itself doesn't shy away from how awkward this whole situation was. I mean, it's right there in the text. They totally acknowledge the tension. Her fiancé, Joseph, he naturally assumes the worst, and he's ready to quietly break things off. The fact that they included his doubt, that's a really key part of the original story. Okay, so that's the faith perspective. Now, let's switch gears completely. Let's take off those theological glasses and put on our historian's hat. What happens when we start digging for actual, verifiable, historical evidence from that time? And this is where things get really interesting. When you compare the sources, you see this massive difference between the earliest accounts and the stories that pop up way later. The Gospels, written in the 1st century, are crystal clear. Mary was a virgin. But then you jump to the 2nd century and beyond, and suddenly you've got these hostile stories, we call them polemics, that are basically attack pieces. They mock the story, they claim a legitimacy, and some even name this Roman soldier, Pantera. And this timeline really just lays it all out. There's this huge time gap, right? These alternative theories, they're not coming from people who were actually there. They're not eyewitness accounts. No, they're attacks written hundreds of years later, and their goal isn't really to report history. It's to tear down the Christian story.
So here's the kicker that historians point to. Even the earliest critics, the ones who are looking for ways to discredit the story, they never name a specific, real guy. They just throw around general accusations of illegitimacy. And think about it. In that time and place, if there was a known father, his name would have been the ultimate weapon to use against Jesus during his lifetime. The fact that nobody seems to have used it, well, that silence is pretty telling.
All right, time for our third and final lens. Let's set aside theology and history for a second and just look at this through the lens of pure reason. We're talking probability, common sense, just based on how we all know the world works, day in and day out.
And when you break it down like this, it's pretty overwhelming. Based on, every human birth ever recorded, the odds are just massively in favor of a normal biological conception. So from a purely rational point of view, a miracle is what you'd call an extraordinary claim. The probability is basically zero. But, and this is a really important distinction, there's a huge difference between what's plausible and what's proven. Yeah, a normal conception is way more plausible, but the evidence to actually prove it just isn't there. There's no document, no witness, no record that names another man. So we have to be careful. What seems super likely isn't the same as what we can prove with historical facts.
And that argument about no one else being named? It's actually not as strong as it sounds. You have to remember, Nazareth was a tiny village, maybe a few hundred people, tops. We basically know nobody's name from there. For the most part, regular, everyday people from back then are just anonymous. So the fact that we don't have a name, it doesn't really prove anything either way.
So if you're really strict historian, you're kind of forced to just throw your hands up and say, we just don't know. Both stories, the miracle and a secret affair, go beyond the hard evidence we actually have. The virgin birth is a statement of faith. An ordinary conception is a statement of probability. But neither one is a documented historical fact. We're just stuck in this place of uncertainty. So, we've looked at this through 3 different lenses: faith, history, and reason. And each one leads us to a dead end. We're at a total impasse. There's no provable answer.
And the natural thing to ask is, so which one is right? After all that, you just want to know what really happened. You want the truth.
But maybe that's the wrong question to be asking. What if trying to solve a 2,000-year-old biological mystery is less important than looking at the massive, undeniable, world-changing impact that the story itself had?
Because think about it. Whatever the biological origin, the story of Mary and her son kicked off this incredible chain reaction that literally reshaped the world. These radical ideas, forgiveness, dignity for every single person, they spread from the ground up, not from the top down. It created this new moral authority that got so powerful that eventually even Roman emperors had to bow down to it.
And this isn't just some abstract idea either. We can actually see the proof of this legacy literally etched in stone, 1,000 years later and 1,000 miles away from Judea.
Check this out. This is the Jelling Stone in Denmark. It's from around 965 AD, and people call it Denmark's birth certificate. And what's carved on it? King Harald boasting that he made the Danes Christian. He's grounding his entire kingdom's identity in this new faith. That little story from that tiny village had traveled all the way up and was now defining entire kingdoms in the north. It's amazing.
And that really brings us to the final takeaway here. Look, the debate over the biology of what happened 2,000 years ago, we're probably never going to solve it. It's historically unresolvable. But the impact of that story, well, that's written all over the map of the world. Which leads to one last question for you to think about. What actually matters more? The biological truth of an ancient story, or the civilization that it helped to build?